own school paper.
Okay, call this July 26, 2018 meeting of the AMATS Policy Committee to order. It is 1:30. Mr. Peterson?
Present.
Mr. Littleton?
Here.
Mr. Shuey?
Here.
Ms. Heil is absent. We have a quorum. Craig, will you do the public involvement?
I got to find Chris.
Oh, sorry.
Craig? Starting the meeting.
On time.
There you are.
Just wondering how to find you.
Uh-huh. Like the story.
Old school paper, sir?
Okay.
Recycling from.
Craig,
Yes.
public involvement announcement?
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
All AMATS meetings are open to the public. The public is invited to comment. If we have a business item, we'll have a presentation by staff or consultant. At that point, the committee will be given a chance to discuss it, and then the public will be invited to comment.
Thank you. Do we have an approved agenda?
Move to approve.
Second. Any changes in the agenda? Any objections? Okay, the agenda is approved. We have before us the meeting minutes from June 28, 2018 for approval. Do we have a motion?
Move to approve. Second.
Any changes or discussions on the minutes? Any objections to approving? Hearing none, the June 28th meetings are approved. Okay, moving on to agenda item 5A, the AMATS Transportation Improvement Program Admin Mod number 20. Craig?
Yeah, so this is, again, some minor changes to the program. What we have is some increased funds for design work, both in Table 3 for pavement replacement projects and in Table 4 for some design work on non-motorized projects. In addition, we have in Table 10, which is the pavement replacement projects in the list back there, we're changing the termini of the Fireweed Lane pavement replacement project from just Arctic to Seward Highway to basically the length of it, Spinard to Seward Highway. So we're just updating that. Those are the three major changes, the design work in both the roadway and the non-motorized projects. So this came before the TAC actually last week, and they recommended approval. So.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Yes, sir.
Table 4, non-motorized, the additional funds requested for the 3 non-motorized items, what's the rationale or reason?
So the additional amount of money that we had there was not enough to start the construction phase of anything. So we thought it made sense to get some more that are design ready, and then in our next tip we'll have the ability to put funds in it for construction faster. That way, if they're designed and on the shelf ready to go. That was kind of the idea. If we had had projects that were designed more recently, we might have been able to move some funds over there. But in this case, give a little more design now and move forward with construction soon.
Ask a follow-up real quick. So is it the amount needed to do the same number of planning projects or design projects was not enough, or are we saying we actually think we should probably design a few more projects so that we have more projects that are construction ready?
That's what we're trying to do.
Thank you.
John?
So just a few years ago when I was on the BPAC, we had $1 million we were real excited about. All the bike lanes you could do with that, and virtually all of it or all went to studies to do designs for projects for the same rationale, that then they would be ready when money was available.
Right.
Were all of those done?
I believe we've got most of those either underway or already completed. That was a project that was, the bike plan implementation and the pedestrian plan implementation have been underway for a while. It's been managed by the Muni with CRW and PTS. I think most of those are already underway or in some version of it, realizing it's going.
Okay, good, thanks.
Any other questions from the committee? Questions from the public? What's the role of the committee?
Move to approve.
Second.
Any objections? Hearing none, the motion is approved. Okay, moving on to agenda item 5B, AMATS Complete Streets Policy. Craig?
Well, Joni Williams is here today to give our presentation on our Complete Streets Policy.
Go ahead.
Yes, So it's a long time coming since we started this project, but we have a policy that's before you, and we have a list of comments that were received from the public and from agencies, and then lastly, including members from the technical advisory committee that we did go through just last week. And so at the request of John Weddleton, who was at the technical advisory committee meeting, I have organized the comments in a way to make it easier for you to go through. So the first, number one comments are, they say number one PC recommendation. These are comments that we received a comment from the public, from an agency. I made a recommendation but felt that it was a better way to have the policy committee make a decision on that instead of a staff member. So those are the first 2, 3, 4, 5 comments on here. So this would be great for you to review those today, especially. And then the next list are all staff recommendations that I made a recommendation either not to change or to change some element of the policy. And then finally, we have a list of number 3. Those are all just comments that really didn't have a recommendation. Either was like, good job, we love it, or made some other comment but didn't actually ask to change anything. And those are all, I don't have a recommendation on those. So, and I don't know how you'd like to go through the table. The technical advisory committee went through it page by page. So we can do that today, or if you'd like more time to look at it, we can do it another meeting.
Can I ask a question first, John? So how many of these comments do we have that are either staff recommended or policy committee recommended? Do you know what that number is?
There's 5. The 5 top ones on the first page are the ones that I think warrant the policy committee making a decision on that comment. Without, I have a recommendation there, but I would appreciate a policy committee decision on that particular comment.
Just for clarification, what happened at the TAC was they took up the comment response table and they recommended approval of all of the changes except for those top 5, which they together figured this was kind of in your purview of making that final decision. They had some decisions on those, but these were ones that at a staff level we kind of felt it was up to the committees to decide. The rest of them have been, for lack of a better term, approved by the TAC or recommended for approval by the TAC. They agreed with staff recommendation on those top 5. It's something that kind of up to you guys.
And sorry, just jump in. Thank you for clarifying. Sorry if I'm confusing
No.
today. That's a great point. So on the TAC comment, if it says TAC agrees with staff recommendation, that means they went through the comments and didn't have any suggested changes to staff recommendation. If there is something different there, I listed the technical advisory committee member name and their comment on what are their thoughts of the staff recommendation. So does that make it a little easier to see?
So the no recommendations are ones that you're not
Check point of
recommending?
order. I'm not sure you're referring to the document that we have. Because I have the one that we had at the TAC, and that matches what's on this thing.
You should have the most updated.
No,
Did
we
you
have
bring your
the-
own?
I just
We have the
pulled what
TAC
had at
draft.
TAC,
Oh,
but
yes.
it matches what's on the computer here. So this is not reordered.
That's the reordered version.
Okay.
I'll step
Anyone
in.
else have the reordered one?
I don't.
Is this match that?
Probably open the wrong.
No.
Don't open that.
So you have the right
Okay,
one.
so this is the one you're talking about, I believe.
Yeah,
The one you
sorry
didn't
about
the,
that.
Here.
Look at the
Here.
physical copy.
The newer version should have been on there, but
It is.
Oh, it is, but
Okay.
it's not off the agenda. If you go
That's
by
because the
J.
agenda, what was posted last Thursday, which was the TAC, the same one they had at the TAC, because Joan, you didn't have enough time to go through and reorder
There you
it
go.
right, a minute after.
yeah, the
So the
information is
correct
the
one's
same, it just got
Right, I
reordered.
understand.
Yeah.
This is the correct one. I think.
So how would we know to get to this with this new system?
In this case, so everything here, that's where you would see all these documents.
How'd you get here?
I just close the agenda page. And here's this agenda page that you're looking at, and just close that.
Oh,
you'll
and
see
then
all the
everything comes out,
documents.
so then,
Yeah.
that's okay, thanks.
So again, I guess going back to my original question here, we've got, well, these are double-sided too, so we've got quite a few recommendations, either it's recommended for the PC or staff recommends this. I guess what I would suggest we do here, because I have to admit, 157 of these, I didn't have the time to go through, and because you've got to figure out where it's at, what the change is going to look like. So I guess what I would suggest we do here is have staff go through on the ones that they are recommending, that staff is recommending, or the TAC is recommending for us to approve, do a track changes in Word so we can see those, and then also put in the ones that you're recommending that the PAC, or that the policy committee look at, so that we have one document that has all the changes, we can read through it, and we can make a decision, because I've going through all of these like this, I think that's going to be a, to use a technical term, a goat road.
And just a follow-up comment to that, before getting the TAC approved version, I tried to do what you described, which is hold the comment response table, look at the draft, and try and mix and match. And I was identifying items in the comment response table that I either had a follow-up question on, or I was going to suggest that we pull out because the recommendation was to adopt with the recommendations in the comment response table. And I had to give up after 19 of them because there's a lot of repeats in the original list that we got. So I was losing my mind.
Is that feasible?
Sure, so just to, so that I hear what you're saying, you would like me to, take the Complete Streets policy and do track changes on all of the proposed comments?
The ones that,
Or
sorry, go ahead.
all the proposed, changes?
And if we could, I believe you can color them in different colors, so the ones that are recommended by the TAC would be in one color, and the ones that are that you're asking for the policy committee, or you're recommending that the policy committee look at, could be in another color. I don't want to get too,
That's fine. There are a number of changes that were recommended by the public that some of them I thought were good, and I said, okay, let's move these forward. Some of them, I have reasoning to why I don't think they're a good idea. Do you want me to include all of the ones that staff does not recommend forward?
I'm just making a suggestion here. I need to get everybody up here
That's
to
fine.
agree to it, but I guess what I would suggest is the ones that you already are recommending, the TAC's recommending, we put those in there. The ones you're asking us to look at and say whether we're going to go yay or nay on, have those in there. The rest of them, I would suggest you leave in the table. That way it'll be a lot less for us to digest. We can then go through those and go, okay, well, this one is not on there, but I think it should be for whatever reason.
Okay, sure.
Yes, sir, John?
I probably agree with that. I went to the TAC and it took well over an hour to go through this. And a lot of it was, yes, I support comment number 12 or something, but it might help because with these, if we could discuss maybe these top 5,
Sure.
and maybe that's not working and we do the track changes, but, because I think otherwise, Joni doesn't know which way to go with the track changes. After the top 5, she could do a track changes and says, this is what the TAC recommends,
And this is what it's going to look like.
and this is what we do, but otherwise, it's like, we'll have 2 versions of the top 5, one way or the other. So if we could maybe start a discussion, go through the top 5,
Sure.
give Joni some guidance. Let's start with the first one, and if it's not working, then we'll.
Is that feasible, what we're talking about here?
Of course, sure.
Okay.
I know it's hard to look at the table and then also reference the policy. So that should help. I do think even when I do that, it will still take some time to go through, but between now and the next meeting, we'll have plenty of time to look at all the comments. So I know it's a lot. So.
Well, as Craig explained to me before we started the meeting, this is not like the TIP. I mean, we need to get it done, but it's not like if we don't get it done, we're going to lose money or whatever. It's important to do it, but it's not a critical path type of thing. So I think it'd be better to take our time and do it right. So is everyone in agreement? We'll go through John's suggestion, how we go through
Yeah.
these top 5 and try to get a consensus on what we want to have Joni put in the top.
Sure.
Okay. All right, so, John, do you want to take a lead on this, because you're
No.
obviously,
I was there and listened, but they did a good presentation, so they fleshed out each
or
one.
maybe Joni.
And I think-
Yeah, I'm
Yeah, I think John,
Okay.
and Jim's here, he had a
Perfect.
comment.
So this first comment is about, so several places in the policy, we talk about what projects this Complete Streets policy will be incorporated into. And so this comment was about saying that the policy should only be relevant for projects, the current and future projects. In other words, not inclusive of the 1R projects, which are like repaving projects. And so this generated some discussion in the committee. It's my feeling that the 1R projects, there are a lot of opportunity to save money and repave in a way that makes better facility for bikes and peds. I brought this as an example. It's an FHWA, incorporating on-road bicycle networks into resurfacing projects. It was sent to me by a design engineer over at CRW, and we also showed it to design engineer at some other design engineers who thought it was a good resource. And Jim Adamson's comment on this one was that DOT doesn't currently allow for this type of, I think, please correct me if I'm wrong, Jim.
I will.
Okay, I will. Doesn't it currently allow for incorporation of these on-road bicycle networks into resurfacing projects? And this may be something that needs to be addressed with a commissioner, or a change that needs to be made in the pre-construction manual. So, and I don't know how that would be remedied, but it's just my feeling that if this is a tool, it would really help us along, especially financially. So I think it's a policy committee decision or recommendation as to how to move forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So if we are resurfacing a road that previously had a bike lane on it, all that would have to be done after the resurfacing would be to put the white line back on. Is that correct?
No, sir. That's not what we're talking about at all. We're talking about roads that do not have a bike lane on them today, and you would be changing them to now have a bike lane, which is a change of use, which is incompatible with a pavement maintenance project, which is supposed to be simply maintaining what exists out there today.
Okay, all right, thank you.
So just so I'm clear on this, Jim, if we had a 1R, we're going in repaving a road and it doesn't have a bike path, what you're interpreting this to say is we would then have to include a bike path in when we resurface a road?
That's what they're advocating for. And adding a bike path takes a significant amount of engineering beyond simply going out to the surface.
So it wouldn't be a 1R then?
No, it wouldn't.
Can I get a clarification on definitions, Sam? I mean, well, we don't really have bike paths, but generally what you're talking about is separated pathway as opposed to bike lanes. I think we're referring here more to bike lanes on the road. Is that correct? Or are we getting into pathways adjacent?
That's one of the problems with what we're proposing right here, is it doesn't differentiate either way, John.
So it could be a requirement, phrased as it is now, it could be a requirement that on a 1R project, you would have to put pathways adjacent as well as bike lanes.
Yes.
Which would mean it is not a 1R.
Right.
That would be a significantly increased effort in environmental and whatever issues that.
And can I just make one comment? Sorry,
Sure.
through the chair. And just to also reiterate, the Complete Streets policy doesn't specifically state that you have to put a certain facility on, but just states that you have to be cognizant of trying to provide for all modes if you can feasibly do that. Doesn't state that you have to put a bike lane on a facility that doesn't have an existing bike lane, so.
That's an inadequate reading of what you've got written right now, Johnny. What you write doesn't give you that much flexibility.
In your opinion.
Okay, well, is there a certain section of the policy that conflicts with what I just said, or?
Yeah, the part that says I have to come back to this policy committee if I'm not doing it exactly the way you're wanting me to do it.
I don't, there's no language in there that says that, those exact words.
Yes, it is.
Okay, well, I guess it's a difference of opinion, but I don't know that we should discuss it right now.
There's another
But I'm happy
section.
to talk about
Yeah,
it.
where there's
Sorry.
exceptions. So now can I, so there's a debate here, so some rewording could get us where we need to be. Is that what so can I offer some rewording on this? So,
I think we should do all 57 today.
no, I think the top five, when I switch
No,
the
no, no,
top
I'm
five
being
would be.
sarcastic,
And that's,
sorry.
I think that's what we're looking for these. So Jim, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so if we were to rephrase in section 3, and so that this second and last sentence read, this policy is a commitment that, where allowed, future transportation projects will take into account, ... Does that give you the flexibility you need?
Yes.
Does that give us the guidance on projects, or are we watering it down too much?
I mean, I think that's fine.
Can you restate it?
How is it? Or where feasible, or where allowed.
Can you restate
Say
it, John?
allowed, because there were more rules. I
This
can't.
policy is a commitment that where allowed or where feasible, the future transportation projects will take into account the needs of all users as early as practical and throughout the transportation planning process. I would say allowed is a little bit like allowed by who or.
Maybe say we're legal? I don't.
I'm not sure this is a legal issue, it's more of a, I guess what, just to be out front here, I believe, and Jim, correct me if I'm wrong here, which I know you will. This is, what we don't want to do is limit our ability to go out and resurface a road and have to get into a bigger project and then be faced with citizens who are, screaming bloody murder because we've got a road that's got potholes all over it, and we then have to go through an environmental and all kind of other stuff to get a separated pathway because we can't fit a bike lane on a road or whatever. Chris?
I was just gonna say, I guess I've read the document differently. I think I'm sensitive to the limitations that you're expressing. I guess I don't see it quite the same way. If it's an encouragement that the principles be used for the purpose of planning, designing, blah, 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 and I see the encouragement language is granting you the flexibility to, within the limitations of a given project, say, there's no way we can do an on-road bike lane because
Right. No, I agree.
it has to be engineered.
Right, I think the word encouragement for me is sufficient here
Yeah,
to make it
I agree.
flexible enough. I was just stating where we don't want to go, but anyway.
I can read it that way too, but then the second sentence, this is a commitment that. So it kind of changes. We encourage, and the second one goes much more solid.
We'll take it to account.
Into account.
The
Yeah,
commitment is that you'll take it into
If
account.
it's interpreted that way, that's fine. I think Jim is not interpreting it that way, so I maybe make it clear.
Everyone's opinion.
Well, but we want to make it clear so that there isn't confusion.
Having been on the other side of a number of meetings on projects in the field, that encouragement is not taken as a suggestion at all. With respect.
And again, I guess what we're trying to do is not box ourselves into, but I guess I believe that this language is, I'm not sure how much more flexible you could make it.
I don't either.
So I'm fine with that language. So just so we're clear here, what we're going to be doing here is giving Joni the verbiage to put in that we will then be looking at next time and review it all at once. Okay. Because I don't have Cindy here to tell me exactly how we're doing amendments to amendments. I'd like to avoid that today if at all possible. Okay, so that was number one.
And sorry, just to
Just
clarify,
to-
what was the change? Did you want to say where allowed or where?
Hang on. Point of order. So I think in order to move the top 5 expeditiously, essentially, we've got a recommendation, a recommended edit from somebody, an agency or somebody. And essentially staff said, yeah, we're open to it, but it's up to the policy committee, and the TAC said the same thing, or in this case, the TAC didn't say anything, but Jim did. I think it's up to us to say, on number 1, we agree with the edit, or no, we do not, in order to make it clear which of the 5 recommendations we're supporting or not supporting.
Okay,
So in the case of item number 1, the comment doesn't specifically spell out a recommendation beyond that we should add a policy only applies to new construction, reconstruction. I think what I'm hearing you say, Dave, and myself, is that we don't agree with that, so our vote on this one would be no. Is that correct?
right.
Okay, thank you. Is that clear, Joni?
So no change there to that language?
That would be
It says no change to add the language about applies only to new construction or reconstruction only.
correct.
So they would not agree with that part of it. That first,
Okay.
the where
I
allowed
see.
language will have to be added later at some point.
And further, to
Okay.
make it transparent, Mr. Chairman, I would recommend that somebody make a motion on whichever the items and whichever way they want to go, make a motion and then follow the rest of the procedure. So if that's the case, I would move that the policy committee not make the recommended change in piece, I guess, number 9, in comment response number 9.
Could we, to make this a little more whatever, could we go through all these, Jody, keep track of what the new language is, if there is new language on the other ones, and then at the end, we have a vote on where, sorry?
Excuse me, public comment before
Oh, right,
motion.
okay,
Thank you.
never mind, thank you. I don't have Cindy here,
No,
so
Cindy
I
wants to-
appreciate that. Aaron, whoever. Okay, all right, so we're gonna vote on number 1 here, and then we're also gonna have Joni put in the language, and then I guess next time we will vote on that language.
But I think to make it clear, would you say the motion would be to retain the current wording in section 3?
Correct.
Sorry?
He was just suggesting a better motion.
So the motion would be to retain the current wording for section 3.
Okay.
Is that a new motion, or is that just, well, reiterate?
We have to do,
We have to do public
Public
comment before we
comment
make
first.
the motion, so.
Okay, so the motion is to,
no public comment.
well, okay, I want to make sure what we're talking about, though. Or then we're going to make the motion after we have the public comment? Sorry. Okay, public comment? Thank you so much. Okay. Okay, John, go ahead.
Move to retain the current wording for section 3.
Second.
Any discussion? Okay, those in favor? Aye. Motion passes to retain the language in section 3. And then Joni's going to make the changes that we recommended. Okay, all right.
And just to clarify those changes, it was where allowed, is that what I'm adding?
No.
There's no change, Johnny. We just
There's
said no change.
Okay, just retain, sorry.
I was confused too.
Moving on to the second one. All right, and I don't know why, I think this was a typo for me. I don't think this second one belongs in there because it's just, yes, I agreed with this and TAC agreed, so I'm sorry, I think the second one we can skip over because I don't think it really needs PC attention. The third one was on page 1, section 1, the definition. We have several folks suggest to us different definitions. We had one, the one that actually went in was the one that the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee revised as a group and moved forward. Thought that was a good one. But this one, in addition to the rest of the definition, adds the underlined text, which includes complete streets are streets enable safe access to all traffic, pedestrians, bicyclists, motorists, and public transportation users of all ages. And then in addition to this, race, ethnicity, religion, income, gender, and abilities, and are able to safely move through the transportation network. My feeling was that it's enough to stay consistent with the national definition of complete streets. It's also the definition Federal Highways Administration has, as well as the US DOT has, which basically is of all ages and abilities. It does not call out race, ethnicity, religion, income, and gender. Number one, it's hard to measure all of those things on a day-to-day basis of who's using the street. And number two, I think it just maybe goes a little bit out of scope of what we can do. That was my recommendation, but I thought it was a kind of a sensitive comment, so I wanted to forward it up to the PC.
Doesn't everything else under here fit under all ages?
Yeah, all ages and abilities is what we have now.
Right, but what I'm saying is race, ethnicity, religion, income, gender, those are all under all ages. All ages would encompass all of that, and probably some other things that we're not listing here.
Right.
So I guess I would suggest we leave it the way it is. Otherwise, we'll be, we could be adding who knows what.
And just as a follow-up comment, I know there's a couple of other comments in the response table that recommend removal of the word ages, simply because I think the commenter pointed out, are we encouraging 4-year-olds to pedal their bike along Seward Highway by including all ages? And the recommended change, when we get the marked up document from Joni, probably will show that. The commenter suggesting language that says, complete streets mean blah, 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 and public transportation users of all abilities are able to safely move throughout the transportation network. So just wanted to point that out, that we will see a change at a future date that removes the age marking. But more specifically, Mr. Chairman, to your observation and to Joni's point about the FHWA definition, I don't see a reason to stray from it either, and it does not call out those 5 items either. So I'd be open to removal.
Any other comments from the committee? John?
Well, agreeing, but I was actually going to go a little further than Chris and just go ahead and make a motion to offer some wording that basically says what you said, all users of all abilities, and delete that whole section. We can do it now.
I figured we're going to see it in the marked up one, so at this point, the only question before us is the recommendation from Jamie Morgan to include those 5 items, so I would recommend we don't.
Any other
Second
comments from the committee?
Not a motion yet, not a motion yet.
Comments from the public? Okay, do we have a motion?
I move to reject comment number 38.
Any discussion?
That's so negative. I move to retain current wording. That's all right.
I want it,
All in
I want
favor?
it to be rejected. I reject it.
All in favor?
Aye.
As opposed, the motion passes. Number 38 is rejected. Number 47, Joan?
And I have to apologize, I'm looking at these 2 comments, and I think the last 2, I think I may have made some glitch in my Excel skills, because I think those 2 comments don't belong there, so maybe for today's purposes, this is enough going through, and then this will be better organized for you to see the changes next time around. So my apologies for that. Excel isn't my best. I'm better at InDesign and Photoshop. There was one question I did have, because there are a couple sections where, so if you look at page 6.
Hold on just one second, because we could do that, or we could go through them, because I have some notes.
You want to go through
It won't be
them
in
all?
order, but, there still are only about 5.
Okay.
Sure.
So they're not in order here,
Sure.
but we can still, and I have the next one here, number 40.
Great, okay. What page is that on?
It's page 5.
Great. Thank you.
It's on page 5. Page 6.
Oh, I'm sorry, that's of the TAC one, so number 40 is page 6.
On page 6.
You're on page 6? From Jamie Morgan, middle of page 6.
Yes, great. Do you want me to explain this one, or do you want to explain? Okay. So this is great. This is exactly what I was going to point out with the other comment, because this appears a few times in the policy. And so it's a difference of using the word should and the word shall. And as design folks and engineers know, using the word shall is a hard and fast, you cannot deviate, and should is, or encourage is not that way. So as we're going through here, some recommendations asked us to be more lenient with the language, some asked us to be less lenient with it. This particular comment from David Morgan with American Heart Association is asking for a stronger language. And so instead of AMATS encourages the above principles be used in the purpose of planning, etc., she suggested we change it to the above principles shall be used for the purpose of planning. My recommendation as staff was that using the word shall mandates rather than encourages. I don't know if that's appropriate for a policy, especially since we're not recommending design specific things here, but and also Michelle McNulty, who's on the technical advisory committee, made the distinction that since this is policy and not a regulation, it doesn't really warrant using the term shall, but again, forward that to the policy committee for a decision.
So I'm just going to read this and then comment on it. The above principles shall be used for the purpose of planning, designing, building, and operating, maintaining a safe, reliable, efficient, integrated, and connected multimodal transportation network that will provide access, mobility, safety, and connectivity for all users. This policy is committed that future transportation projects will take into account the needs of all users as early as practicable and throughout the transportation planning process. I got to say, as someone who represents a group of people who have been doing this very thing for the last 50 years, it's a bit of a, it's a bit whatever to see something like this on a piece of paper, which implies we haven't been doing this, and then to see not just encourages, but shall, is even more of a, kind of a bitter pill to swallow, because I am 100% sure the folks who I work with do this thing and have been doing this thing every day for many, many years. And I will get off my soapbox derby now, or soapbox, maybe it's a soapbox derby, but get off my soapbox now and leave it to others to comment on this. John?
Well, you know, I agree with that. I mean, I look back 30 years ago and now, and the way we build our roads, it is dramatic, and that it is being done. So I don't think it's a problem to set a high bar and say, and you're doing it. So I would certainly hope you don't take offense at this. I mean, it is amazing to look at how we build our roads now. It is very good, and it meets, to me, we already do this. I mean, I'd agree with that. But now we have a stated policy just to make it really clear. But don't take offense, especially if we set a high bar and you meet it. That's something to be happy about. I'm okay with shall. I think Michelle swayed me at the TAC meeting, and we don't need shall in here. But I don't want you to take offense about this whole process.
No, I just want to let you know that there are folks who do, because it's kind of like someone's been doing something for 30 years and you say, I want you to start doing this, or I want you to do this. And then when you put shall in here, and I guess the other issue I have with shall is I don't know how many times I've been around lawyers and they're like, they debate whether it should be shall or will. And I'm still not sure. If my wife tells me to do, I shall do this or I will do this, it means the same thing. So I'm not sure what the difference is there, but the lawyers seem to, but I guess the encourage is enough, I think, more than enough in my mind. So I guess I would support not making this change.
So do we put it to comment?
Yes.
Well, if my old colleague, Max Grunberg, was here, he could give you about 15 minutes on the difference between shall and will, maybe a half hour, so.
Yeah, we have to pay anything. Okay. So, any other comments from the committee? Comments from the public? Do we have a motion?
Move to reject comment number 40.
Second.
Any other discussion? Okay, we have a vote, or comment number 40. All those in favor of rejection? Aye. Those opposed? Okay, we are taking comment number 40 off. Was there another one, Joe?
Days ago. Was it days ago?
It was a week.
Remember.
Yeah.
It was a week ago.
Good days.
Okay, number 49. 49. Will the policy
There's 8 at the bottom.
is page 8. Please.
Okay, so this is a comment from Pierce Cobb, there, from Bike Anchor. Thank you for your comments. And it is about the exceptions to the policy, and that they are approved by the policy committee. And so the request in this comment is to, in addition to an exception being approved by the policy committee, is to also have a public comment period for the public to comment on any project that comes through that warrants an exception to the policy. I understand the importance of being able to give public comment, and we appreciate that very much here at AMATS. It was my opinion as staff that as the policy committee is a public meeting, as is our technical advisory committee meetings, and there is an allowance for public comment at all of those meetings, that would suffice as a public process. It's when we're looking at reviewing projects and having them come forward, it's pretty onerous on staff to engage in additional public comment periods. And you can see the amount of effort that went into just creating this table. So my recommendation is that the policy committee meetings and the technical advisory committee meetings serve as those opportunities for public comments on those projects, and we don't add an additional required public comment period.
I guess I have a question on exceptions in general. Like this, unless I'm missing something here, there isn't anything that I see in here that's prescriptive that says you have to do this. I mean, it's design streets with pedestrians in mind, encourage, allow flexibility. It's a whole lot of language that is not prescriptive. So could someone give me an example of what an exception would be to this? Because I'm failing to see where it would be.
Sure, I'll just, unless anyone else wants to jump in. So when we drafted the policy, we used some case studies of other places that had complete streets policies. Almost every other policy had an exceptions section. So that was pretty consistent throughout. I think one example is if you have a project that you could spend money on to make it more of a complete street, but say in order to do that, you needed to put in a separated path or something that was very expensive infrastructure. Does it make sense to spend all that money on doing that on that road, or could you take that same amount of money and do several different bike ped facilities on different roads? That way, this road that when it came through as a project would have the exception that, maybe it's not financially feasible to put the facilities here when that money could be better spent elsewhere. That's one example.
John?
I might give another one, and one thing is, I think when we think about this, we think about the network providing transportation for everybody, so not specifically every street. And I think we have an example is if you have Northern Lights in Benson, if we redo Northern Lights and don't put bike lanes on there, an exception could be allowed because we have a bike boulevard paralleling it, not even a block away, do Photo Ave or whatever, 27th, whatever that is, 27th, I think.
Yeah.
So we take care of the bike ped by doing a bike boulevard instead of a bike lane. So that would be an exception that I think is totally in the spirit of this because it provides mobility.
Just so I understand, so if we're doing that work, then this body is going to be looking at it and going, this is an exception, and we're going to vote on whether or not that would be an exception or not to this policy?
And allow an
Chris,
exception.
sorry.
Yeah, no, just to clarify, you're absolutely right, but I think that the recommendation coming from the public is to add language to section 6. They didn't offer specific language, but to add language to section 6 that requires not only the documentation in cases where an exception is being requested, but some form of public input or public comment. And I think that there's a comment from staff, a response from staff that says, given the current policies when it comes to public input or public process at AMATS, that might be duplicative, but they leave it up to us to decide. So I think the issue is less about are exceptions okay and more of do we want to add an additional layer of public input?
John?
Maybe, but I believe somewhere at the TAC, we had a big discussion, should these come to the policy committee? So if that's not this comment, it's another comment, and we should decide, do we want, I mean, this says that every exception will come to the policy committee. Is that reasonable? Would that hold up projects? Is it a burden for us? Would we have 5 projects a meeting? I don't know what it would be.
I guess I still don't have a really good understanding of when we say this is an exception. I'm still not clear on that, because if we're, and that's a concern of mine, if we're creating a system here where we're gonna have a lot of exceptions, like with 1Rs, then I've got a real concern here. And I'll be honest here, I haven't had a chance to go through this entire document to see what exactly we're as a Department of Transportation, what we would be agreeing to do here, or as an organization, what AMATS would be agreeing to do here. I would be concerned if we have a lot of exceptions coming through, and we have to agree to those or not agree to those. That adds just another layer in what is already a very, cumbersome effort to get a road redone. So that's a concern of mine.
And if could I make a comment too on that? Because I think that the chair brings up a really good point. And so something that would help, I think, decide what needs an exception and what doesn't would be this complete streets checklist. And I know that this is part of the policy that we wanted to have complete before it was brought to you, but we just didn't have time. So we're working on that concurrently now to bring you something. But a lot of cities have a complete streets checklist that they go through, and basically it's just an opportunity for the project engineers and designers and planners to make sure that the project is following sort of a complete streets approach. And so this would give, and there's a lot of flexibility. I have one from the city of Oakland. It's just a 1-pager. It's pretty simple. In contrast, Fairbanks has a 9-page checklist that they use for their complete streets project checklist. And I think once you have the designers and planners and people in charge of the project have gone through this checklist, you can really identify whether or not something needs an exception or doesn't. So I think that will really help filter some of this through so that you won't be seeing a bunch of projects. Hopefully may be the rare case where a project needs an exception, but so just something to think about. And this is, again, I apologize, not done yet, but we will be drafting this and having it come through.
So I guess, Joni, this kind of goes to the heart of what I was going to bring up later, but now that you've mentioned it, on page 4, at the top of the page, the 3rd bullet down, the project's compliance with this policy shall be determined. So this is where the exception comes in, I believe, based on the filing of a complete streets/green roads, I believe, which is going to be taken out, checklist form. So we need to, this checklist is the heart of this whole thing. And that I haven't seen, and I know it hasn't gotten out there yet, but that's what I really want to look at, because that will tell me what's going to be an exception, what's not going to be an exception, and what's going to be okay, and it doesn't have to go anywhere. So before we go too far with some of this other stuff, that right there to me is the key to this whole thing.
Yeah, I think that's a crucial, you're absolutely right. And so in terms of timing, I was hoping, we did have a committee that worked on the policy, and it involved a bunch of different agencies. We could either move forward with trying to draft. I could put out just a draft and have folks comment on it, same agencies, of course, DOT and traffic and PM&E, and everyone will be at the table. So it was my hope just to get on that, because Mayor brought that to my attention, and I agree with you 100%. It's very crucial. So if we could potentially have something drafted for you before next month's meeting, would that be?
Before next month's meeting?
Before next month's meeting for you to look at.
Can you also provide us with a copy of Fairbanks and maybe a couple other?
Yeah, we have those 2 for you today. We've got those here
Okay.
for each of you, and I can find more if you want more to look at.
I just soon not go with the 9-page version. Haven't even looked at it yet, but anyway, that's just
I'm a fan of
fine.
the 1-pager myself.
Okay, great. Yes, sir.
So go back. Let's imagine a world where you've got your one-page checklist and it meets your needs. The root question before us is whether or not there should be an additional layer of public involvement or public comment in exception cases. And I think the recommendation from staff and the TAC agreed was that given the current policies when it comes to public input, public comment of the AMATS process, there does not need to be an additional layer of public comment or public input. And so the question before us is, do we agree with that or not?
So just for clarification though, because John asked earlier, would all these come to the policy committee? Would all the exceptions come to the policy committee? So that's, we need to make sure we understand that before we get to your question.
Yeah, let me, thanks. You're probably right on that, but I didn't see it in my notes from the TAC, but I believe we had a discussion on, gosh, do we want every one of these go to the policy committee? Is that one of these comments, or did that, where was that?
I don't recall that discussion, but maybe it could happen, maybe I was zoning out, I hope I didn't miss that. I don't remember that discussion. Jim, do you remember that discussion on that?
Yes,
Okay.
there was a discussion. I haven't seen the notes that are supposed to be capturing what got discussed though.
So I'm free to make, roll with it then.
Do you remember what?
Unconstrained.
Can I ask a question here? Joe, do you have, or you or anybody else have a sense of like how many exceptions we would be seeing like in a year?
Gosh, I really don't. But maybe when we're drafting this checklist, we can, I'm not a designer, I'm just a planner, so it's hard for me to take a guess. It might be a better question for like someone in our PM&E and traffic departments to take a stab at. But maybe when we're drafting these checklists, we can try and get a rough estimate, or I honestly don't know.
Aaron, you have a comment?
Aaron O'Brien with DOT. The issue that it brings up is what is this applying to? It's applying to planning projects, design projects only? Because it brings up, when do you apply this? Because are you going to do it at the beginning of design before you obligate the funds, which has a potential to delay the funds, in the middle of design? So what do you do if it doesn't, you guys don't approve the exception? Are you going to pull the funding or other things like that? If it's planning level, then you're in an MTP right now and you have 170 projects that you'd have to go through to see if it meets an exception or not. And then on regular tip years, you have 20 projects or so, I don't know, that you would have to do this with, depending on when you apply it. So some years it may be few, some years it may be a lot.
When do we anticipate doing the checklist? Don't say the regional director.
I don't know. What I should do actually is I should call these cities that have been doing this already and get some information back to you. Like Fairbanks, they could probably give us a real easy, oh, this is who is involved and this is the level of effort.
They've been doing this for a while?
And they've been doing it for, I don't know when they adopted their policy, but it's been at least a couple of years maybe now.
Okay.
But they'd probably give us a real easy, this is what's involved and this is how many we see and this is why. So I'm happy to call around and get that information.
And in my mind, when you have an MTP, you have, a sentence or two describing the project. That's nowhere near at the level of detail that you could even think about possibly even considering exceptions. It's just not, it's not possible. And in the tip, you have, there may be 20 projects or so in the tip, but each year you've got room for maybe one or two designs and some right-of-way, maybe some construction. So it doesn't seem to me like there are that many that you'd be looking at. And again, I think as you said earlier, this is a policy that encourages that we look at all users. It doesn't say you must, you shall. We didn't agree with that part. So it seems to me that it wouldn't be a lot, but that's just a gut feeling.
Aaron, you have another comment?
Sorry, the language in the policy actually specifically calls for planning, design, right-of-way, utilities, construction. So to me, that makes it seem like it should be applied to all aspects of a project, even when you're doing the MTP planning. So that's why I'm asking, because as a person who's helping with that, it brings up a lot of concerns.
And I appreciate that point. Part of why I keep pulling us back to the comment in particular that John highlighted is when we get the final document that's marked up, you're going to see suggested language changes to this section that specify where it should be applied or how it should be applied that I think will be more helpful for us to look at when evaluating doesn't seem to be in here at all. So I think rather than heading down that philosophical road today, John, I think we want to address the commenter's position first and foremost. That would help Joni craft the revised document for us to look at. Then we can come back to it. Because you'll see, happens to be Aaron's comments on how to modify section 6 to make it a little more clear.
Where are those? Which was it?
Well, there's a lot of his in here, but in particular, page 3 of 23, it's comment number 17. Page 3 in the new version of the document. So he's recommending, the point about new construction versus reconstruction projects in particular. It's the very last one on the bottom there. He's saying add that sentence, or that clause, I guess, to the first sentence in the exceptions rule, which helps give a little more specificity about what kind of projects that exception would be applied to. But again, I think we want to see this document marked up and come back for us before we start diving into micro little edits.
Okay, so just to summarize here, I believe, so Joni, you're going to check with other agencies who do this, you're going to get copies of checklists, you're also going to kind of get a feel for how many exceptions they get, and then we're going to get a little more clarity on perhaps when other organizations, use the checklist, what stage of a project they use it. And then do we need to, John?
Well, actually, okay, we had a question for Aaron, just so I can see. So, or anyone, I guess, but Aaron might know. So if this came, because you wouldn't really know until you're at maybe 35% design or something, if you go, well, dang, we can only have a pathway on one side, or it has to be discontinued, whatever, some exception, okay? So if you saw that and said, okay, now we're not in the spirit of this, we need to report it to the policy committee, and if we go, no, find a way, we don't allow that exception, figure it out, and maybe there is some technical way, where does that leave you? I mean, do we have the authority to do that at any point?
Yeah, it just comes with ramifications. Because if you're in the middle of a design, there's a lot of things that are tied into this, and I didn't really want to get into it too much today, but it causes a lot of problems for DOT, because we are putting ourselves in a position to accept that federal money from the feds, saying we're going to a construction project. And if at some point you say, no, we're not going to continue with it, let's pull the money, blah, blah, DOT is on the hook to pay that money back unless they can get the feds to say, no, you don't have to pay it back. And that's a lot harder to do nowadays. In the past, as Craig has pointed out, it was done on DeArmond Road. It was pulled, the right-of-way funding was pulled, and DOT got to work with FHWA and say there was cost and controversy. That doesn't exist anymore in a lot of the federal things we can find, because we've tried to look this up for the MTP. So if you're in the middle of a project and you don't grant an exception, then it's up to the will of the body of what you guys want to do at that point.
And just to add a little something to that, if we have to pay back federal money, that's money we're not using to plow roads or cut brush or fix potholes. There's no other place for that money to come from, and it's just a waste of money, which is not a good thing to be doing. So we need to get clarity on exactly when this thing is going to come. That you didn't get the exception, you can't do this project type of thing. That's got to come sooner rather than later, much sooner. So that'll be the other thing is, like I said, when they apply this, when they do the checklist and say it is or isn't. So okay, so
Now for one last comment on that, and then we'll move on. I think if we go back to our earlier conversations about the recommendation phrasing in the Complete Streets Principles or policy, it's encouraging people to think about these things all the time. So my hope would be that as we're planning out these projects, we're already thinking in our minds we should be approaching this through a Complete Streets lens. So we're going to start to identify early on what some potential problems could be before we reach a mission critical 35% stage or later that jeopardizes funding. So I feel fairly comfortable that, given the document's intent is to start a culture shift in thinking about designing, constructing roadways, that we're going to already start thinking about this through the complete street lens at an early stage, and some of these problems should surface faster than the situation that you both just described. Now that being said, I'm very sensitive to the fact that there are those instances where something does come up very late in the game, and you find yourself having to plead for an exception to a case. The exception language that I read, or as I read it now, actually grants you, I think, the flexibility in coming back to AMATS and saying, we need this exception or we can't meet our financial obligations in the body. That's one of the criteria we can use when evaluating those exception requests. So I feel like the system is set up to both encourage early thinking about planning around complete streets, but also a relief valve if you find yourself up against the wall.
So should we table comment number 49 until we hear back from Joni and her research in other agencies and how they, because there may be, I mean, we may find that some do this and some don't do this at a policy committee level. Does that make sense? Okay. Was there another one, John, or was that it?
There is one more that I noted, and that is comment 106.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you, Cindy. Public comment? Yes, sir.
Yeah, so my name is Pearson with Bike Anchorage. Just want to first of all thank you guys for discussing this. Really excited about the complete streets policy. A little bit of background. We get a lot of comment from the public on roadway projects, and people come to us asking questions as to what the plans are, maybe why a bike lane wasn't included for certain things. And I would love to have the opportunity to bring them a checklist or something to say that, well, look, here's DOT's explanation as to why that didn't happen. They're going to put another road in parallel, or there's another explanation for it as to like what the overall connectivity plan is. That would help us a lot in just communicating with the public that, yes, as a city, we are totally considering this policy and these practices. Here's how the process went down. So I think that's maybe it. I mean, you guys are already doing that. We've increased our non-motorized facilities dramatically in the last 30 years. And I'd love to just have that extra layer to be able to come back to the public and say, this is the process and this is what the thinking was originally.
Thank you. Any other comments from the public?
I'd like to just ask Pierce something. You know, something when I read this, and I don't think I'll make the motion today, but maybe at the next meeting, but you know, this says any exception to this policy must be approved by AMATS PC. What if it were changed to any exception to this policy must be reported to the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee and the Policy Committee? Yeah. So if there's an exception, we hear about it. If we feel it's egregious, then we could take action and say, no, we're not gonna, you need to design it different. So anyway, that's more of a question. I mean, is that something that gets you the public process you're looking for?
Yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to bring it up to make sure we thought through what the process looked like when an exception was granted. And if it is just a reporting item, I think that's fine, as long as there's an opportunity for the public to be brought along in the process and why the exception was granted.
Thank you. Any other comments from the public? Okay, so we've tabled that one. John, did you have one more?
Yeah, my notes from the TAC meeting show 106. It also says 2PC. And I see that on top of page 13.
That's 106, John?
Number 106, yeah.
This is not
Must be the
one.
other one.
Oh, is it that? Does Bart Rudolph have a comment on that one? Or do you want to?
Yeah, it's got Bart's comment.
Okay. Do you want me to explain this one too? This one.
Was this to go to us? I guess my note said 2PC.
This one was not to go to you, but I think it's a good one. It's still.
This is from Carol.
Yes, this comment was so they did a sort of a grading of our policy. Carol Fink with State of Alaska Department of Health and Human Services, and she's also on our Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee. They had this system where they used National Complete Streets Coalition data and sort of gave us a grade on our policy versus other policies. So her comment basically was to add in, into our language, let me see where it is. Was to add into our language, to prioritize, so number 5, the number 5 points, it's sort of 3/4 of the way down. Policy language requires the jurisdiction to prioritize vulnerable users or neighborhoods with histories of systematic disinvestment or underinvestment. Instead, makes it open to all users, prioritizing pedestrians, bicyclists, and motorists. And this was actually a grading point on that National Complete Streets Coalition. Does the policy do this? Does it require jurisdiction to prioritize vulnerable users, etc.? So the comment and my response was that we should include some language that said we were prioritizing Complete Streets project in areas that exhibit high concentrations of vulnerable users and have a history of systematic underinvestment. And so that was my recommendation. And then when we took it through the Technical Advisory Committee meeting, Bart with Transit, who's here day 2, is made the point that it is really hard to assess whether or not a community has a historic, systematic, a history of systematic underinvestment. It's easy to sort of see areas that are getting a lot of investment currently, but how do you go back in time and figure out the communities? So, so maybe changing that language back to the original language, because I agreed with that actually after I thought about it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Bart's comment makes perfect sense to me. How do you define having a history of systemic underinvestment? One person's definition of that would be totally different to someone else. And so it's just pretty subjective, it seems to me like. And I think once we get, a complete definition of complete streets and come up with our hopefully one-page list, I think we will probably alleviate some areas, worries about being continually left out.
I guess I'm confused by the comment. Instead makes it open to all users, prioritizing pedestrians, bicyclists, and motorists. Am I missing something? Who else is there? How can you prioritize? This is prioritizing everybody, it looks to me like, but maybe I'm missing something in this definition here, or this comment. Or is that
That's just editorial from the commenter. I think the language change that's recommended by staff is in the next column.
Right.
Minus the section that Bart Rudolph from the TAC recommended removing.
Okay. Any other comments from the committee?
I didn't make it, so I think what we're looking for here would be a recommendation to accept Bart's comment. Is that what we're?
The comment minus Bart, or the comment with Bart's suggested removal.
And I would support that. I think we have to have someone in the public, but and just an example would be, say, on the hillside, in regards to complete streets kinds of things, we have systematic underinvestment. But there's good reasons for it, because we don't have the density that other parts of town should probably have a priority in bike lanes and so on, and we'll work our way to the hillside. So we'd have a misallocation of resources if we made the hillside equal to downtown or South Addition or something. So, so anyway, I agree with this. Makes sense.
Okay, comments from the public. Okay, any other comments from the committee? Okay, we have before us comment 106 and do we have a motion here?
I move to accept Bart Rudolph's comment.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion.
I'm sorry, we'd have to make it more complicated, really, because we would accept the recommendation 106 with the deletion that Bart recommended. That's what we have to do.
Second.
Okay. We have a motion and a second to accept 106 with the deletion of and have a history of systematic underinvestment be removed. Any other comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Motion passes. Okay. That is all right, John?
That's all I have.
Okay. All right. Are there any other action items, Greg?
No, sir.
Okay, moving on to agenda item 6A, 2040 Metropolitan Transportation Plan update. Craig, will you be presenting?
Actually, Aaron, can you, I don't know exactly where we're at in the MTP, you guys just.
Okay.
We're
Sorry, I'll fill in for Vivian.
projects.
Aaron Yongan with AMATS DOT planner. So the MTP team has just finished giving all the information to the consultants to get the project model that were brought before you. We've been working on that. The consultants have finished all but 16 of the projects. They have some additional questions on. So we're meeting with them next week to finish that up, and we'll hopefully get something out soon. We're also working on the fiscal constraint analysis. So next month, towards the end of the month, last couple weeks or so, we're going to try and do a work session with the TAC and policy committee to go over fiscal constraint analysis, kind of a 101, so everyone can understand what it means, you know, why do we have to do it, and what is it supposed to do. And then we'll start working on some of the base information about that and be bringing you guys along with that. So just a heads up, it's a lot. It's going to take a lot of work sessions to get through. There's a lot of things to go over. There'll be multiple presentations with tons of charts and graphs, my favorite thing, that I'll be kind of helping with. So that's where we're at with the MTP right now.
Thank you, Aaron. Any questions from the committee? Questions from the public? Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you.
Agenda item 6B, AMATS 2019-2022 Draft Transportation Improvement Program 30-day public comment period. Craig?
So the TAC released this at their meeting last week for public review. That we'll get a little bit more than 30 days out of it just because of the weekend. So August 20th, I believe, is the deadline. It's posted on our website. You should have it in the electronic documents there. I have paper copies. There are paper copies over there as well, but we're having it out for 30 days. We basically have taken, the scoring team looked at all the projects in the MTP. They looked at short range and long range. They looked at all the nominator projects. They ranked and scored them using the criteria that the policy committee adopted. And then taking into account scope and schedule, dollar figures, all that sort of stuff, and whether or not they fit well in our program in terms of the financial constraints, came up with this proposed tip that's out for public comment right now. The one point I guess I would make is that keeping in mind this is ranking and scoring projects based on the criteria, and the policy committee is always has the ability to move projects around should they wish to do so. So these are the technical recommendations, and that's what's out there. Happy to answer other comments. I do have paper copies if people want to whack away at it. I also printed off the aggregate scores for the ranking for both non-motorized and roadway, so you can see where those, they just laid out. One thing just again to keep in mind as I talked about the financial constraint, you know, the highway to highway project or sewer to Glen connection, it scores very, very well. It is a very important project. It's also an extremely expensive project that won't fit into the tip easily without saying it'll take every single penny in the next two tips to do it, which seems like not the best use of our funds. Whatever projects we can get done. So that's the kind of thing that we have to look at, but happy to answer questions.
Don, you have a question?
So we've got this in front of us now. Should we whack away at it now, wait till the comments come in? And how much time after we see the comments will we have time for kind of us to review and comment?
So our hope is that you will look at this, the draft tip in the next month or so and get us comments during it. It'd be easier for us to adjudicate them when they come to the TAC before they come to you. I'm happy to answer questions now if you'd like. The idea is that we'll get the comments, we'll provide staff response to them, and then it'll go to the TAC before it comes to you. The step is approve the tip so that we can start it through the process, the approval process, which is you agree that this is what we're going to go with, and then we have to go through the assembly and get their recommendation. We have to go through the Citizens Advisory Committee and get their recommendation, and then it'll come to the TAC and the Policy Committee for final approval.
Can I follow up? Okay, so on any of these, they're so briefly stated, where do I get more detail on any of these?
So the MTP projects are all in the interim, the current MTP. The detail that, you can see MTP 114, it'll give you a little more detail on it. The rest of the projects were nominated, and those, I can get you that backup. If you so desire, whoever wants it can get that. I can print off all those.
Is it online for people?
Those aren't publicly available?
I don't know that we have them posted, but I can post the ones that are in the tip, or there were, gosh, I don't remember, probably 20, 30 projects that were nominated.
Okay. Can I even outline an issue here? Sorry. I just want to outline an issue. It was discussion we had at the TAC, but if you look at the one for roadway projects, you have one MTP number 115, Farweed Lane Rehabilitation, Spinard Road to Seward Highway, scores high, and that's fine. But then you see down, just a little bit further down, Farweed Lane Rehabilitation. And that would make most people pause. Why is it in there twice? The second one is because it's not in the MTP, it was nominated with highlighting that it should be a road diet, kind of complete streets, I think, that we've been talking about. So that's very distinct difference. It was stated at the TAC that it scored lower because it might be more controversial, so it has negative points or something. So I don't know if all that's technically correct, but they're different. So, but someone reviewing this would like to click on that and see that information, or have that readily accessible. Is that available to people?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, every AMATS document is a public document. I can make it available.
Okay. Yeah, because I think that, and I think there are a couple others that look like duplicates that are positive. Can you do it so they look? Is this online and I click on it, or how easy can you make that?
I am not technically astute enough to answer your question right now.
Okay.
But I'm sure that we can figure out how to do something.
Okay,
That
I
will
would
work.
hazard a guess that it is technologically feasible to hyperlink every single item in the list.
It
and
is.
show it to a document.
Right, it is.
Can you guys do that for us?
Yes,
Thank you. Perfect.
I say, knowing that someone else will probably be doing
By
it.
means, as long as you say yes, I know it'll get done.
I mean, I created the agenda, and this is the agenda that we've had for a while, which is, here's the document, it's a PDF, and then each item in there is hyperlinked. So, yeah, we can do that.
Cool.
That's a great point, John, thank you.
Any other comments from the committee? Any comments from the public? Okay, any general comments from the committee? I will just make one comment. We do a safety moment every time we have a meeting, and I would just caution people, when you're following behind a truck or a vehicle that has stuff loaded on it, be very careful. There's been some rather horrendous accidents in the last couple of months, and it's because people didn't secure their loads or whatever else. But just keep an eye on that, because it's something that happens with regularity, and I'd also like to wonder why people keep hitting our bridges. But anyway, that's a whole different subject. So.
Well, on that subject, Mr. Chairman, when I was in Juneau this year, I happened to go to a Judiciary Committee, House Judiciary Committee, and they were talking about increasing the fines for, and the penalties for people who lost things off their loads.
Mm-hmm.
And
I heard that testimony. It was pretty heartbreaking.
yeah, and so people need to be aware that they can actually go to jail now. So securing your load is not something that is just a $10 fine or whatever when you show up at the dump. It can be much more serious than that.
Yep.
And there's people's lives are at stake when you're traveling down the road 60 miles an hour.
Sure.
So, thank you.
Thank you. Any comments from the public? Okay, thank you all for participating. This meeting is now adjourned at 2:50.